Let's go through that. First, let's examine the position of this paragraph in the whole. So I talked about paragraph 522, the moment of the dissolution of the family, naturally by death, and talked about the element of possession, family possession, which of course then comes to the surface in the laws dealing with legacies. And in that paragraph, therefore, in 522, we see that the limits of family are the entrance to civil society. There is an obvious a series of legal determinations connected with the family. I mean, the law of marriage, the law of legacies, hereditary law, I think it's called in English, and of course laws dealing with the property of family.
So, can I ask a question? So, if a law belongs to civil society, what does then belong to the state?
Well, everything that grounds and makes possible what we now call the civil society. Ultimately, the state will be the product of civil society in its logical development. But what we reach later is, in realities, before that, is sooner. That's the movement that every part of the system Hegel is making. So logically, we move forward, but we move forward to something that has come before. The state is the presupposition of civil society. Civil society without the state is actually impossible, as he will show. Likewise, the family life is impossible without civil society. And so that's the order of things. You can look forward to the logical outcome of a contradiction that we find, and by moving forward, you're actually moving backward. You're going into the basics, the basis of everything. That's a dual movement of dialectics in this area of philosophy. So here, civil society is, well, let's say it's the system that makes families possible as something substantial, as something that is that can survive the subjective changes. Let's say a nice example would be the fact that if you fall out of love with your wife, you're still married. So other people are protected against the fact that you sometime on Monday evening decide no longer to love your wife, and then you say on Tuesday to everyone who has a contract with your wife, sorry, I'm not going to pay for it because I fell out of love with my wife. And then on Wednesday, things change again, and you say, well, now I'm loving my wife, so I will pay for everything that happens on Wednesday. You can't do that. You can't do that. It has to be a consistent and substantial order in society at large, but it's not marriage itself which grants that. Marriage itself is given that position. I mean, if two people decide to live together and to call that a marriage and to have someone record that doesn't mean anything. The same way, if I take something and call it my own, it doesn't mean it's really my property. It's in my possession, it's not my property. So this legal recognition from the outside is vital for what property or marriage actually is. And that is not just an external determination of marriage. Actually, it helps the two subjects involved to remind them that they have to keep their vows, that they have made a commitment. It helps them to know that they are legally married in order to try and fix their problems, which they might have as partners in that marriage. So it works on two sides. Ultimately, you cannot explain the whole of society just by looking at the families that it consists of. You could say society is a construction built with various families that are intertwined and work together, etc. That can't be enough, because the family itself needs a ground. It needs a basis. So you can call the family the basis of society, or you can call it the atom of society. But that suggests that the family is something well-rounded, a complete reality in itself, that you use to build up civil society. And then civil society will be only a way of organizing the families. That's not the case. Civil society brings on a new element of liberty that is not, that cannot be expressed in the concept of the family. So we will see that now. In the family, it's impossible to be a complete individual. And to be a complete individual ultimately is necessary for civil society.
But Hegel mentions that there are, in the translation it says private person, and that means families and individuals that have their private interests. So that from that standpoint, it's everyone for their own. Everyone is chasing their own interests, and there are thinkers who see society in that way. Nothing needs to be fixed if it's that way, each on its own.
So that would be a philosophy of anarchy, ultimately. That is what you're referring to. If we're all basically individuals and nothing.
I don't know, is Hegel referring to some of his predecessors by...
Well, if he does so, he will do so explicitly, and I can't find it here so much. The point is that from the family, ultimately, a son or a daughter will grow up to be able to ground another family, and at that moment there is this individualization. You're appearing out of your family and you're going into a new family, but there are ways in which a family member will express himself as an individual precisely in order to be able to maintain the family. I mean, if the father in the family goes to work, he is there not as a family member, but he is there as an individual laborer. And he is that individual in order to provide for his family. So there is this weird connection between individuality, which is the opposite of being part of a family, and the maintenance of a family. So the family, by necessity, expresses itself in the form of an individual family member that comes to stand on his own in a certain way and to a certain degree. And at the same time, that individualized member of the family is doing what he is doing on behalf of and for the sake of his own family. So there's dialectics here. Certainly, someone has to leave the family in order to become an individual, but as an individual, he is also taking responsibility for the family he is coming from. Now that is what is the main principle of the Bürgerliche Gesellschaft, civil society. So civil society consists of families who all have this dialectical dynamics of producing individuals that take responsibility for the family that they come from. Now let's read a little bit and we can find out how he is expressing himself. So die Substanz als Geist sich abstrakt in viele Personen, die Familie ist nur eine Person, in Familien oder einzelne Besonderen, die in selbstständige Freiheit und als Besondere für sich sind, verliert zunächst ihre sittliche Bestimmung, indem diese Personen als solche nicht die absolute Einheit, sondern ihre eigene Besonderheit und ihr Für-sich-Sein in ihrem Bewusstsein und zu ihrem Zwecke haben. Das System der Atomistik. That's a very complicated sentence, and yet it's not a very difficult sentence. Complicated, so therefore only structurally, formally. So this substance, the substance meaning that we're talking about freedom as it is embedded in habits and institutions, without the full self-awareness that is there. The substance needs to become subject, is what Hegel said in his phenomenology. Now, this substance is, of course, already the substance of Geist. We are in the philosophy of spirit. It's turning itself into something particular. The zonderend is a participle, in an abstract manner in a multiplicity of persons. So, substance as spirit expresses itself in particular as a multitude of persons, families or individuals. Please, now setting themselves, families or individuals. You can look at the family as one individual. You can look at the individual as belonging to a family. So it's interchangeable. A family is always one person. I don't know about other families. I have nothing to do with other families. I live within the confines of my own family. But this substance now moves on and puts many families next to each other. Now, all of these families that this spiritual substance consists of have an independent liberty, and they are for themselves as particular. They're never universal. Family is never universal. It's always this family with this set of grandparents, etc. Now, is that social ethics? It loses, in the first instance, its socially moral, the difficult word sittlich, is social ethics. Sittlichkeit is social ethics. German can say that in one word. Let's say it's social moral determination, because these persons, so these families or these individuals with their independent liberty as being particular for themselves, this family and not some other family, this particular family with these grandparents, with these possessions, with these line of marriages, if you make a genealogy of your own family, you see the particularity of your family. Now, they are not the absolute unity. They have not the absolute unity in their minds. That's not what they are concerned about. Family is not concerned with how to live with other families. Not even actively with how to maintain the unity of the family. It's substance. It lives. It does not reflect so much. Whatever comes to its level of consciousness, or its conscious level, rather, is only its own particularity in how to preserve that. It's only this being for itself in distinction and in contradiction to others. That's what für sich sein means. Nicht für anderes sein, not to be for someone else. Not to be what it is because someone else or something else is connected to it. Für sich sein, kind of an absoluteness. Within its consciousness and as its goal. So what am I trying to do as an individual coming from a certain family, or as this particular family? I want to maintain myself. I have this family as my goal. There's no particular goal connected with the family apart from surviving. Just to keep on being there, to grow perhaps in property, or to grow in numbers, or to grow in importance and influence. But that's the only thing I have in mind at this level of the development of the social spirit. So that is what he calls das System der Atomistik. A family is the ultimate atom. That is, it cannot be divided more than that.
So from that standpoint, families and individuals, they do not have a consciousness of civil society.
No, they don't.
Okay.
I mean, civil society doesn't require you to have a consciousness of it. That's the interesting thing here, because it has such a substantial element. I don't need to have a consciousness of the interest of others. Why not? Because if I work for my own interest within the modern economy, I will do so even without thinking about it. Because I can only serve my own interest by serving the interest of others. It's an exchange. If I work for myself, I'm doing actually a labor that will benefit someone else. I'm not curious about how it benefits someone else. I'm curious about how my labor benefits me. Nevertheless, by doing work, by performing some kind of work, I'm not simply gratifying myself, I'm also serving others. And that's not by my own doing or by my own consciousness, that's by the system in which I do my work. The system guarantees that others are involved in the things that I do simply for myself, that other families benefit from the things that this family does for itself. Without any consciousness, therefore, I don't need to know where the product that I'm making in the factory will actually go to and how it will affect the lives of others. I don't need to know when I am a farmer and I'm producing grain. I don't need to know who will eat my bread, ultimately. But I know that by producing and selling my grain, I will certainly bring bread to the table of my own family, and that's enough. The system will provide for the benefit of others. Now, this leads him to say, die Substanz wird auf diese Weise nur zu einem allgemeinen vermittelnden Zusammenhang von selbstständigen Extremen und von deren besondere Interesse. Yeah. So, to put it otherwise, it will become economy. So the liberty of the family with its possession, providing for itself, will now become the system of exchange. It will become an economy where goods are exchanged, where labor is performed, where money is introduced to make all of that work smoothly, etc. Because die Substanz wird auf diese Weise nur zu einem allgemeinen, economy is completely general, completely universal. It must allow everyone to participate, to work. It's Zusammenhänge, so an interconnection from independent extremes. I mean, independent extremes in the sense that I'm making grain and someone else is raising pigs, and I can trade my grain for these pigs, part of the grain, so I can have my pork chop sandwich, something like that. And so there is a system that allows me to do so. And of course, what I then wind up with is in the best interest of my family, and what the other party winds up with is in the best interest of their. So it's like a universal contract that is at work. I'm doing something that I can exchange for something else that I need, etc. That's economy. Die in sich entwickelte Totalität dieses Zusammenhanges, so the way that my needs are fulfilled by others, that my gratification of my needs will actually also gratify the needs, fulfill the needs of others. That is external state. So that this economic order is the external state.
What does it mean, external state?
That it does not require a political consciousness. It's simply the system of sharing and exchanging as families among each other, which is only possible on the basis of some kind of ordered organization. But that organization doesn't depend upon my consciousness of it. The market economy is blind, nevertheless it sees. It's blind because it doesn't require the full consciousness of what is going on. And it sees because every action that is in conformity with the economic order will ultimately gratify everyone else to some extent. So the blindness, this is about the blindness of the economic order. And that's the external state. It's the state simply that exists out there as an organization of social life without requiring me to consciously participate in it. And so the farmer farms, but he doesn't reflect on farming, and he doesn't need a philosophy of farming, and he doesn't need to express his farmer identity.
But does the external state or civil society do something? Is it doing something?
It simply orders what is already there. I mean, it follows by necessity that if you are an agricultural family and you want also to have some electronic devices, or you want to have tools, that you need to go to a family that has no agricultural activity but produces farm equipment. And it's obvious that there should be some kind of trade here, some kind of exchange. And by necessity, there must be some kind of institutionalized form of that, because otherwise someone might not make a particular kind of farm equipment because that family itself doesn't need it. No, that family is producing that farm equipment also for others, because those others might give the grain that they themselves cannot produce. I mean, Marx will write extensively about this idea of specialization. Hegel doesn't. He simply says, well, every family has this particularity. Part of the particularity is the economic particularity, that some families are devoted to producing grain and others are devoted to producing farm instruments. And the system will allow these producers and consumers to meet each other. So actually what he's saying here, this external state, is the market. Everything connected to the market economy. And that's why he needs to talk first of all about the system of needs, because that is what the market economy is all about. It's an expression of our deficiencies, of our needs. And in that expression of needs, in this market economy, a new type of freedom emerges. That's the freedom of trade, that's the freedom of to have the liberty to acquire the means for the gratification for the needs of the family. That's a new kind of freedom. The family as such doesn't guarantee that. I have no obligation as a family to provide for the needs of other families, unless there is a system that prevents me from doing everything on my own, that drives me toward exchange, that drives me toward sharing with other families, etc. You can't live off farm instruments, but you can't live off grain alone also. So there is this, as soon as we start specializing, there is this need to have some kind of communication system whereby these families can, by gratifying their own needs, also gratify the needs of others. And that system itself is simply the basic economic system, the basic system. It is different when money comes into it, when there is a difference between producers and consumers in the full sense of the word, where we have the capitalist society. But this is, let's say, the economics of any society, whether it's capitalist or not. There's always something like this. So this is the basis. And it proves that we cannot consider society as a system of families alone. We need to clarify the relationship of these families amongst each other. And that relationship is what we call the economy. That's the relationship of families. It's not political yet. It's simply economical. How to take care of your own household? Well, by indirectly taking care of other households. That's the, let's say, the bottom line of this idea of economy. But it's external state. It's state because it is, let's say, um, a law for all families. It's a higher authority than the families itself. But it's external because it simply deals with the way families try to survive, each for themselves. There is no shared interest among these families. I'm not really concerned with the survival of any other family. I'm concerned with my survival, which indirectly provides survival for other families. But in a sense, there's only this für sich sein, to be for itself. So there is no political community yet. It's simply the economic community. In the economic community, the participants in the basic economic community have no politics. So they have no shared interest. They have no common cause. Simply, the only common cause they have is to make the system survive. If it doesn't work, then such a system would be on the brink of a catastrophe, because there is no possibility to steer the whole, to, let's say, provide.
So what could possibly bring such a system on the brink of catastrophe? Because
All
it
sorts of
seems
things.
it works naturally.
No, but let's say, if one family becomes too big and too influential and it can shut out other families at whim, or when there are not enough families to provide for particular needs, or when there is a catastrophe and the harvests are all destroyed, so there is no grain, so there is no possibility of exchange, and families might die unless they're helped by other families, which won't do that because that is in contradiction with their own self-interest. Then you have a society that is collapsing and will turn to violence in order to survive. And the families will take up arms because they have to survive. So there are lots of reasons that, such an external state will survive as long as there is plentiful of goods that can gratify needs. The sooner as there is the possibility of poverty, as soon as there is, all sorts of disasters, natural disasters, then the system is really put under enormous tension. It needs an internal state to be able to say, I'm willing to share some of my abundance with this unfortunate family that wasn't able to survive otherwise, that wasn't able to survive without help. That means that I can identify with that other family. But on what basis can I identify with the other family if my identity is fully enclosed and defined by my own family? I am part of this family. I'm responsible for and to this family and nothing more. So how does it come into my mind? It needs consciousness and awareness of this inner unity to be able to work for someone else's family. To say, I will give up some of my wealth in order to help someone else. That presupposes a consciousness of the universality of spirit, universality of humanity, so to speak, within a society. And that implies the internal state. The internal state is the expression of the inner unity of these families, which is only there if it's consciously affirmed. Family life doesn't need to be consciously affirmed or negated for the same reason, if there is plenty. But you need the internal state in order to survive in the system of families where sometimes things break down. If all goes well, there's no need for the internal state. We could all have our small families, and the only thing we need you have these systems in early Middle Ages, I believe, of separate villages that are completely enclosed upon themselves, and the only thing they share is that they have a common marketplace. The Dutch words for truth are derived from the vocabulary of such a marketplace. They have, how is that called in English, a periphery, a boundary, and if you enter into that boundary, you come into an open market and you have to leave all your weapons behind. And then if you are on that market, then things become exchangeable, because you can trade one pig for, let's say, 3 swords or whatever. And if you get stuck in the boundary, then of course you are neither part of the market nor are you part of the outward system. Now, Dutch had this wonderful idea that the openness of the marketplace is called truth, waarheid. The thing that is exchanged within the market is called a waar, W-A-A-R. That's a good that is exchanged. If you are stuck in this boundary, you are in the war, which means something like you're a fool. I mean, you're neither this nor that. And the concept of truth, I already said that, that's the openness of the marketplace. And a lot of words are derived from that WR stem. And it's funny that it all goes back to this early village market system, that competing villages that might even kill each other when they meet each other on the road, or might try to steal women from another village. They have this truce at the marketplace, because that is in the interest of everyone. It's not a common interest, but it's in the interest of everyone to be able to trade. And that's where the Dutch word for truth comes from. That's interesting, because therefore, etymologically speaking, truth within the Dutch-German history has something to do with the value of something on the market. If something is true, therefore, it would mean that something has been exchanged properly. That is, true value has been discovered and has been used as the worth that is exchanged for. So we have a very commercial or very economic, basically economic point of view about truth. In the same manner, for the Greeks, of course, you know that aletheia means the unhidden, that what was hidden in the Lethe river, the river of death, where you lose all memories. And aletheia meaning what is recovered from that hiddenness, what is uncovered, what is open now. That's a very that's a concept that has much to do with death and loss of remembrance and recollection, whereas the Dutch-German concept is much closer to the ground level of life, and it is more or less an economic concept. I like that. I like that. I'm not in favor of doing philosophy by etymology, but this is an interesting one.